Today's topic, for which you've committed your entire life to, is geoengineering.
International treaties were passed in the 70s forbidding that type of operation. Do we think that they can't do it today?
Why are there billions of dollars, including taxpayer dollars, in these clandestine programs via, we just discovered, the USAID has been funding geoengineering and cloud seeding.
We have too many agencies trying to protect their paychecks and pensions and not willing to tell the truth, Nicole.
The more that we can empower individuals with the language and the science and knowing how to ask for what's needed and why, that's where the real power lies. The power is in the people.
How can we have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything, from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation? And taking that narrative builds bridges instead of burning them.
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Dane Wigington, thank you so much for joining me today on Back to the People podcast. Today's topic, for which you've committed your entire life to, is geoengineering. And you are a citizen researcher, journalist, scientist. Would love to touch on your background as well, and really help people understand what's going on with geoengineering. There's lots of talk of chemtrails, and then the retort that comes back is chemtrails are a conspiracy theory. And that's been the method for silencing a broader discussion on this issue. Geoengineering, under the work of climate change mitigation, is commonly accepted and being pushed across academia. I see investments for it all the time here in Silicon Valley, and government programs all over the world interested in climate change mitigation through geoengineering. But I think we've got to unpack it for folks. But to start, maybe you can explain your background and how you came to start tracking this stuff. And would love to hear that story.
I'm very grateful for your voice and investigation in this battle, Nicole. And this is a very perplexing issue in that it's the emperor has no clothes moment, that the obvious ongoing operations in our skies that have tainted our formerly blue skies, disrupting precipitation patterns and hampering the ozone layer. I mean, it's a toxic sky, toxic precipitation scenario. That's what got me into this battle. So when I grew up in smoggy Southern California, wanted to get out of that environment, finally made it to Northern California, built a large off-grid home, wind, solar, and hydro in the wilderness on the east side of Lake Shasta. I began to lose 40, 50, 60% of my solar PV uptake, solar power uptake. My home was on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. I mean, this is part of my background. And I knew that I couldn't lose 60 or 70 or 80% of my solar power uptake from just condensation. I began to research, Nicole. I was shocked at the amount of data on climate engineering, geoengineering, solar radiation management that existed that I had not seen. I began to test my precipitation, hoping I would not find climate engineering elements in it, starting with aluminum nanoparticles, but I did. I continued my testing over the next 18 months. The levels of aluminum in my rain, and aluminum is toxic to all life forms, by the way, no exceptions. This is bioavailable aluminum. Want to make that clear. Aluminum is abundant in the Earth's strata. It does not exist in free form naturally, period. If it's in free form, it's been mined and refined and dispersed. It's a primary element in climate engineering patents. It was in my precipitation. Over an 18-month period, the amount of aluminum in my rain went from 7 parts per billion to 3,450 parts per billion. That's highly toxic rain. What was I to do but to face this battle? And that's what I did.
Yeah, interesting. So your story is one of a guy who wants to go off grid, who wants to use solar to power your home and your life. And you really became in harmony with nature and started noticing your solar panels were not capturing as many photons as to be expected. And so it had you perplexed. You started measuring your environment to try to figure out what was going on, and started to see abnormalities happening. What year was that?
2002, 2003, in that span of time. And for the record, since that time, so much toxic rain has fallen here, saturating soil microbiome. It has literally changed soil pH values 10 plus times toward alkaline. And I have the historical USDA baselines in my possession. So we have a solid baseline. I got that from a contact on the inside of USDA. So imagine how much material it takes to change soil pH values 10 times toward alkaline from 5.4, 5.5 to 6.5, 6.6. Nothing's adapted to that. It's killing virtually all soil microbiome. There's no soil decomposition here. And we have official agencies blaming all the massive forest die-off, and our forests are completely imploding, not just in Northern California, the entire North American West Coast and most places around the world. And they blame that on beetles or a pest, which are simply, that's a symptom of a sick, dead, dying tree and ecosystem. So again, we have too many agencies trying to protect their paychecks and pensions and not willing to tell the truth, Nicole.
Interesting. Do you think that, it I'm trying to figure out how to get individuals who have the power to pay attention to how geoengineering is actually causing climate change. It's exacerbating it in ways. It's speeding up drying. And, i- you know, even in the best case scenario where the goal is to block out the sun to keep the land from heating, to keep
Correct.
the immediate atmosphere around the planet cooler, because that's
Yes.
their stated goal.
Yes.
And but the problem is that it's not working the way that the science that they're using or they claim to be using. It's not getting to the solution that they're hoping for. In fact, it's working in reverse. How do we get through to people to show them that the particulates that they're using for cloud seeding are heating and drying um, our climate? Because that's functionally what's happening,
It
correct?
is. Your assessment is absolutely spot on. That's exactly what's happening. Climate engineering, under the stated goal of mitigating the thermal energy buildup of the planet, is actually exacerbating it, making a bad situation worse, pushing us from the frying pan into the fire. These are desiccant particles. When you feel atmospheric moisture flows with too many condensation nuclei, the droplets don't combine and fall as rain. It scatters out into an opaque white sky, a featureless white sky, which we now see all the time. And that is the stated goal of, quote, solar radiation management. But as you correctly alluded to, they don't take the consequences into consideration. They never have. So in our groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming,
Hmm.
which has had over 25 million views in spite of extreme social media censorship, in that film is footage of me confronting the world's most recognized climate engineer, Dr. David Keith, at an international conference. And they banned me for that question, by the way, after that was asked from the next conferences. But this shows their mindset, that in that symposium that Dr. Keith gave, stating the objective of scattering tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the sky annually. My question to him was, has any toxicological studies been done, human or environmental? And he first paraphrased by stating, well, there's a lot of particle matter in the sky anyway, a bit more won't hurt. And my follow-up question before they cut me off was, that particulate matter isn't aluminum nanoparticles. Have you studied that? His answer was no. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. Of course he knows. Of course they know aluminum's toxic. They simply don't care about the consequences, nor did they with the detonation of 2,400 nuclear bombs, which contaminated everything on the planet. Project Starfish Prime, Project Fishbowl, detonating hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere that they thought could collapse the entire atmosphere. They did it anyway. So that's the kind of mindset we're dealing with, Nicole.
Yeah, it's a similar mindset that we see in the farming sector with glyphosate. It's a
Yes.
similar mindset that we see in vaccine manufacturing, and food manufacturing as well, with various dyes and shelf stabilizers and dough conditioners. It is a ubiquitous mindset of, well, it's already naturally occurring. A little bit more doesn't hurt, and you're going to get that exposure over there anyways. It's a very problematic mindset. And the I think the reason why groups get stuck in this mindset is because the fear mongering, the fear mongering of a mass pandemic that's going to wipe out 90% of the population, or the fear mongering of climate change, severe weather events that are going to come if we don't immediately block out the sun. That's the validation that is often used. It's the logic, it's the underpinning of the logic that allows individuals to put these poisons into our air and slowly eradicate our rainforest by drying them out. And but when you really start to unravel it all, it's deeply misguided. And that's the piece that we have to be clear in conveying, that we have better solutions for climate change mitigation, that we don't have to actually be blocking out the sun yet. And I think this message is very important to get through to young people right now, because they are being recruited at an alarming rate. If you're at Harvard today or at Stanford, there is a geoengineering group at both of these schools, and they're recruiting young people to either, one, be activists for geoengineering, or they're being recruited to work at the firms that are responsible for conducting the geoengineering. That's where some of our best scientists and young people are going these days. They're being misdirected. How do we stop the fear mongering that states that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater?
We know these programs are ongoing. We would argue at geoengineeringwatch.org that climate engineering, solar radiation management, is a recipe for near-term planetary omnicide. So not only is it ubiquitously contaminating the entire biosphere, no exceptions, everywhere, but it's also destroying the ozone layer, which by itself is a near-term existential threat. There are many forms of human activity that are problematic for the ozone layer, but nothing mathematically even compares mathematically to what climate engineering is doing. And this is a known consequence of climate engineering. The climate science community admits that if we geoengineered, as if we haven't been for decades, that this would occur. So how bad is the ozone layer right now? Although we're told it's getting better, that couldn't be further from the truth. Again, I stress this is an immediate near-term existential threat. A former NASA contract engineer has worked directly for geoengineeringwatch.org, metering UV radiation on the surface with state-of-the-art equipment into 5 figures, which we supplied him. We're getting UVC on the surface now. UV spectrum is UVA. We're told 95% of incoming UV radiation is UVA, 5% UVB, no UVC. Below that is X-ray. We know how bad that is. We're getting UVC in the surface right now. DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiations, killing insects, killing plankton, causing skin cancers. And the current condition of the ozone layer, based on our readings, is about 30% remaining, not 30% gone, 30% remaining. Climate engineering, again, the single greatest causal factor for ozone destruction, not just the oxidative particles that are being dispersed into our skies. And based on rain tests we took working with University of Minnesota, internationally recognized agricultural institution, hundreds of tests, and extrapolated the amount of material in those tests and projecting that globally, it appears something in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of these toxic nanoparticles are being dispersed annually and then manipulated with frequency transmissions, which also destroy the ozone layer. So, in regards to being alarmed at this, I would argue, especially with climate engineering in the equation now, we have every reason to be alarmed. Based on recent peer-reviewed study, plankton populations down in the Atlantic, 90%. That's our primary source of oxygen, the foundational factor for life on Earth, 90% decline. Insect populations, geoengineeringwatch.org. And I'm not blaming everything on climate engineering. I want to make that clear. We have glyphosate, as you stated. We have localized frequency transmissions. But on a matter of scale, climate engineering, the biggest factor in this equation, insect populations down 80 to 90%, terrestrial and aquatic. Geoengineering Watch was the first to publish that. About 12 years ago, climate science community tried to marginalize us. They've since had to admit to it. My point is, if the insects can't make it, how long will we be here, especially if we're destroying soil microbiome, root systems? Nicole, have you seen every time the wind blows, trees are tipping over all over? Have you seen that?
Yeah, yeah, no, and they're drying. Their root
Yes.
systems are drying. Their internal, those rings, the xylem and the phloem, they look brittle. It doesn't look right. Um, we have a lot to unpack from what you just said, and my job is to be a interpreter. Um, that's always been my job. I was a patent professional for many, many years, and my job was to always try to interpret genius talk into something everybody else a layperson can understand. And so to break it down, aerosols. Remember those spray can aerosols from the 70s and 80s? And then in the 90s, there was this huge fear that aerosol cans had to be banned because they were destroying the ozone layer.
Correct.
So what is in an aerosol can? It's chemicals that are kind of compressed,
Mhm.
and then they're released as a spray. And there's also a chemical component in that spray. Remind me what that chemical component is that compresses it in the can?
Well, in hairspray cans, I'm not sure the spectrum that they use, but CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, are part of what the ozone damage was blamed on, while completely ignoring the biggest factor of all, again, climate engineering.
Right. And so now we're at a time where climate engineering is using that similar aerosol style projectile of chemicals into our atmosphere at a much higher volume than what comes out of that little spray can that we
Inconceivably
use.
higher, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm trying to map this out so folks can understand why so much of our ozone layer has been compromised so quickly over time. Is that um, and that it's well understood science on how ozone layers are impacted by aerosols. They effectively damage the ability of the atmosphere to respirate with sunlight and photons, correct? So what and maybe you can help me better explain this. I haven't looked at the science thoroughly enough. And I know you have, which is why I love having you on the show right now. Um, Help me understand how spraying damages our ozone layer through geoengineering, 'cause you show the patents beautifully. You have the planes, I mean, I encourage anyone listening to go and watch the dimming. It's on YouTube, and you open the film with the front page of patent after patent after patent of all of these different designs on airplanes for large projectile aerosol spraying.
We have a list of well over 200 patents. Again, for people that don't know, I mean, there's been patents for weather modification going back well over 100 years. So the particulates have an oxidative effect, and then the manipulation of those particulates also damaging the ozone. And then we have other peripheral factors. Again, the constant rocket launching is tearing holes, gaping gaps in the ozone layer as well. But in regard to a very thorough examination from the former NASA contract engineer that I made mention of, at geoengineeringwatch.org under the ozone destruction section, you can see a hour-long interviews. There's several with him, with his metering graphs showing exactly how dire this damage is. He predicted on the current course that we would face functional ozone layer collapse in the next 2 or 3 years. And that
Mhm,
means we're not going to be growing any food. And we see the repercussions of that now. So we have what's called vapor pressure deficit, VPD. That's affecting everything from crops to forests. That's when the stomata, the respiratory ports on, again, crops, forests, all types of flora shut because the UV radiation is too intense. The atmosphere is too dry, as you correctly stated several times. These desiccant particles are reducing atmospheric RH, relative humidity. So the stomata shut. Forests do not smell like forests anymore, nor have they for a very long time. We have forests that were massive carbon sinks before, Amazon, northern latitude boreal forests. They're now carbon sources. We stated that 10 years before the climate science community has finally admitted to it. And I live in the middle of what was a thriving forest 20 years ago, is virtually imploding. Recent peer reviewed study for the fir trees, the predominant tree in Western North American forests. The die off is so catastrophic that they named this study Firmageddon. I think that's pretty clear. So again, while people are going about their lives as if nothing's wrong, the planet's primary life support systems are completely imploding.
Well, people are terrified about climate change, and they are being told that the climate is on an irreparable crash course, and these massively destructive weather events are inevitable. That atmospheric CO2 is to blame, and that in order to stop global warming, we have to block out the sun. But what people don't understand is that A, and this is where your world and my world collides, is we can solve 100% of our CO2 emissions issues through carbon sequestration through farmland and forestry. 100%. Why aren't these people focusing on that? Why are there billions of dollars, including taxpayer dollars, in these clandestine programs via, we just discovered the USAID has been funding geoengineering and cloud seeding. That was just uncovered a week ago. Um, and why is all of this money going into blocking out the sun, which has known repercussions to exacerbate climate change, to make it worse, speed it up, and lead to a 100% extinction event where we cannot live outdoors anymore? Because that's what's happening. We won't be able to grow food outdoors, and we won't be able to live outdoors. And that's a devastating reality. Why would we be, accelerating why are we accelerating our way towards that future when we could be investing in real carbon sequestration in the here and now?
If I could clarify, and I think this is very important, that those at the top of the power pyramid are not behaving benevolently in regard to these programs, that these programs are in fact in so many ways malevolent. And let me give one specific example. I mean, and you're correct. This is the stated purpose is exactly what you stated. Agree fully. And it is sterilizing. It's rendering the planet incapable of responding in the way it needs to, sequestering carbon. It can't. Not if soil microbiome is dead, root systems are dead. We have peer-reviewed study to prove that exposure to bioavailable aluminum shuts down nutrient uptake in roots, everything from crops to forests. So everything they're doing is wrong. But if we look at specific examples, right after 9/11, when former NATO Supreme Commander General Wesley Clark was given the list of countries to be targeted after 9/11, of those 7 countries, every single one subsequently underwent a once in 1,000 year drought. Statistically, mathematically, that's impossible unless there was intentional intervention operations. We have the leaders of those countries, in the case of Iran, on the floor of the UN stating NATO is cutting off our precipitation. Why? You cut off precipitation, you disrupt food supplies, you destabilize populations. If we go all the way back, Nicole, to it's the beginning of my weekly non-political, commercial-free 1-hour broadcast. We pay for that airtime around the country. It's called Global Alert News. It's the most news you can pack in 55 minutes. The very first 15 seconds is film footage of former President Lyndon Johnson on film on the record, ranting like a lunatic, stating that in 1962, we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and he who controls the weather controls the world. This is a covert weapon of the controllers, a weapon with which they can bring populations to their knees and blame it on nature. Have we been bad stewards of the planet? Absolutely. Where would I start? I mean, everything again from the farm chemicals to we're going through 100 million plus barrels of liquid hydrocarbon a day, 26 million tons of coal. We're paving the planet. We're polluting the oceans. I don't know if you saw, Nicole, off the coast of LA, they found 500,000 barrels of DDT that's been dumped there. And that's one of 18 dump sites we now know of. 500,000 barrels of DDT dumped after dark off the LA harbor, all sitting on the bottom, all hemorrhaging, leaking now. Is it any
I
wonder
didn't know that.
everything's
When was
contaminated?
that?
Yeah, that's anybody can look that up. There's plenty of news to back up what I'm saying. So
Is it leaking or is it
oh, yeah,
contained?
absolutely. Barrels breaking
Ah,
open everywhere. 500,000, they think at least, and that's one of 18 dump sites. So I'm pointing out, we recognize we've been very bad stewards of the planet, but this intentional intervention in the climate system, we would argue for use as a covert weapon, will pound the final nails into our collective coffins if it's not stopped. And our point at geoengineeringwatch.org to unite the tribes, because this is such a polarizing climate, anything is so polarizing by design. What we would state is that how can we have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation, and taking that narrative builds bridges instead of burning them.
American ranchers steward our land. Buying 100% U.S. born, pasture raised, and processed meat supports American ranchers and American farmland. That's why I'm glad to partner with Backyard Butchers. Backyard Butchers is delivering quality meat directly from the ranch to your doorstep. All Backyard Butchered beef is certified pasture raised. This means animals are never confined to a feedlot and are able to roam freely and behave naturally on pastures. This roaming can function as a natural fertilizer and benefits soil and water health. It also tastes delicious. Backyard Butcher's meat comes straight from Texas ranchers where they know the actual rancher and how the meat was raised and processed. They have beef tallow for your skin or your french fries. Check out the Steakhouse box. It's got T-bones, fillets, incredible burgers, and more. There's something every member of the family will love. Backyard Butchers is good, fresh meat raised in Texas the right way. Go to backyardbutchers.com/Nicole and use code Nicole for 20% off. That's backyardbutchers.com/Nicole, code Nicole for 20% off. I agree we have to build bridges, which is why I've decided to also take on this issue in addition to the other issues. But it does seem like one, and I'll tell you a personal story. I'm a surfer, and so I was out surfing and in the morning, and it was a beautiful, clear blue morning. And I started seeing the checkers starting to form. There was a plane ahead, just above, and it started to streak the sky. And then, I'd seen it enough times. I knew what was going to happen next. It was going to those streaks start to expand out into this kind of like thicker but thinner layer of
Mhm.
clouds. And then the wind started because I was out there long enough that particular morning. And the wind started to blow, and it was an offshore wind. And in that moment, because when you're surfing, your brain is relaxed, I I started to remember all of my kind of physics 101 laws of thermodynamics. And it was this winter. It was just a few weeks ago, and I started remembering how wind will move as the ocean attracts the cold air from on shore because it's winter time. So the air over the land is going to be cooler, and then cloud layers might with sun in the morning might be warmer. And so as the water heated, it got warmer, the wind would naturally go from a cold front to a warmer front and blow. And it was actually quite a heavy wind that came out of nowhere. And it made me realize that what the cloud layer was actually doing was it was actually heating beneath it. It wasn't cooling, it was heating beneath it. It was trapping
Yes.
the sunlight that was coming
Yes.
off the ocean as the ocean was heating
Yes.
in the morning because it will just or the air over it because it's, sunshine, water, mornings. It warms up you can feel it. You can feel from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. that it gets warmer, which is what happens in nature. And as the wind was blowing, I was thinking about Los Angeles County and how that offshore wind, those Santa Ana winds were showing up in the wintertime. How odd. They're not supposed to show up this late in the winter. It's usually a fall event. Um,
Yes.
and I was thinking to myself, I was recalling I was just surfing in Malibu earlier, and I was like, wow, they've really turned on a lot of this like spraying they're doing. Cause in the surfing world and in my world of tech, we're all aware of it. For us, it's just part of life that we've accepted. We were hoping someone stops it, but it wasn't one of my causes, so I wasn't paying attention in the sense of, this is catastrophic if we don't stop it now. I hope that they stop it because I like sunshine and sunny days. Um, but it's occurred to me that this is a much more dire issue than I initially thought. And if those doing the spraying don't understand that they're increasing fire risk, let's just talk about fire risk for a minute here in California because it's a big problem here. How in the world could you spray over the coastline knowing that there's going to be fire risk on the horizon? Because it doesn't take a genius to understand just the first and second laws of thermodynamics. These are pretty straightforward events.
Like safe and
And
effective, right? A bit in
right.
the same category that they certainly should know, and adjuvants of aluminum and mercury. Again, I'm just pointing out that we have whole industries, in this case, the climate science industry, that pretending that this isn't raging in our skies, pretending they could, may, might do it someday. I mean, it's truly an asylum at this point. And you're completely correct about them affecting convection, which affects surface wind flows, period. And we do see, and our metering has proven that some of the aerosol applications actually create a lens effect, creating more heating on the surface, exactly as you just described. You're completely correct.
Interesting. Well, thanks for confirming that for me. I was able to confirm it in some of the literature that I've had the opportunity to read in the last few weeks. But a lot of people now, smart people who do take it upon themselves to do the right thing, are starting to take this seriously because of thankfully you've been putting works out there, and people, citizens are coming forward and reporting respiratory issues as well. They believe, many citizens across the United States believe that they're experiencing an increase in respiratory illnesses right around the time the spraying occurs. And I think that it behooves all of us now to understand the severity of the crisis we're in.
On both those fronts, if I could elaborate before we get past the fires,
Yes.
in addition to affecting surface wind flows, which create a bellows effect if there's any type of fire, it feeds oxygen into that fire. We have some very alarming red flags on that horizon. We found at geoengineeringwatch.org a US military document titled, it's posted for everybody to see with important sections highlighted. It's titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. Within that document, it describes exactly the type of preparation, even over the course of years, that we have seen take place in California. Regarding the lack of precipitation in California, there is zero question that these operations are the core causal factor. The US military was so effective at creating precipitation, augmenting it in the 60s with Project Popeye, so effective that international treaties were passed in the 70s forbidding that type of operation. Do we think that they can't do it today? The Chinese government openly announcing that by 2025, and we're there, that they intend to augment engineered snow and rain over at least half of their air mass. And we think they can't do it here. We've posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. We can speculate on the agendas and objectives. We're not trying to provide answers for that. But the fact that we can see on satellite imagery operations with desiccant particles that are disrupting convection, storm formation, and precipitation that's taking place off the North American West Coast, it's beyond dispute. If anyone looks at our disseminations going back over a decade, our reporting, we stated if these operations continued, this would happen. We've informed, I've had personal meetings with Gavin Newsom, a personal meeting with his top aide in his office at the Capitol, presented data. Not that anyone like Gavin is ever going to do anything to make a difference here. We know he won't. He's a tool for the matrix, but they know. Top level EPA meetings in Sacramento, they know. Top fish and game officials I've met with, they know. No one's speaking out because they're in fear of their paychecks or pensions. But on the fires, again, this is important. Not only are these areas dried out, and beforehand, in this document I mentioned, cited 17 locations within the continental US. This is in a US military document as study zones for these type of operations. One of them was LA. Your listeners can look this up. That should be alarming. And these particles, starting with aluminum nanoparticles, are incendiaries. They're such a powerful incendiary that it's used in military demolitions, thermite. What's that doing being dropped from aircraft? And it is because our lab tests prove it. It's in the air column. And I'll leave it at this, Nicole. You remember the Paradise Fire, right?
I do. In fact, I have a friend from high school who works for the government in Paradise, and he knew he said he went home to his wife 2 weeks before the fires, and he said they're planning to burn the place down. And his wife was like, "What are you talking about? You're going mad." Um, it was he's convinced that it was planned.
I'm sorry to say that I would agree with him, and that we filmed. This is in our documentary, The Dimming. We filmed blanket aerosol spraying operations directly above the Paradise Fire smoke bank.
Ugh.
What's that about? That can only be nefarious. So again, we can speculate on agendas and objectives. The source of ignition is a separate subject. There may be
Mhm.
many sources of ignition, but the creation of extreme surface wind flows, just like we saw in Lahaina as well. We had a very anomalous high pressure zone to the north, rotating clockwise, rotating upper level winds clockwise, anomalous low pressure zone to the south, rotating counterclockwise, Hurricane Dora. Between you have a wind field that's a blowtorch effect. That's what happened to Lahaina. And by the way, Lahaina was declared a flash drought area a week before that happened. Same scenario, same setup again and again and again. And the fact that these particles are incendiaries and that they're in our air column and we're breathing them, which you correctly stated earlier, on that note, we have recent peer-reviewed study to state that depending on the location and conditions, we may be inhaling as many as tens of millions. They said up to 20 million nanoparticles in a single breath. That's hard to conceive of unless you remember that a nanoparticle is so small you can fit 100,000 across the width of a single human hair. And our air column is saturated with these particles. I encourage your followers, I'll leave it with this. Go out on a dark night when you see the aerosol operations occurring and there's hazy skies and a place with no light pollution. Take the brightest light you can find, aim it straight up at the sky, and look straight up through that beam, not through it, but up as it's pointed skyward. And you can't believe what you're seeing. It looks like a snowstorm. There's so much particulate matter coming down.
Oh my goodness. Um, yeah, no, this friend from Paradise, he reached out to me because I had made a comment about the LA fires, and in that comment it was very broad. I was like, there's something strange about this, all there's just aspects of it that don't make any sense, from the fact that the mayor was warned and the reservoir was empty, and that the Santa Ana winds were coming so late in the season. And also the fact that I had personally noticed that there was, quite a bit of unusual activity, spraying activity in advance of all of this. And again, people who are skeptics will claim that it's all coincidence. It's just all a giant coincidence. But when you have, folks reaching out, and I keep my DMs open for this reason. I really want people to be able to get their personal experiences to me and to remain anonymous if they would like to, um, because they trust that I'll go and look at it. It's been a process of listening that I think that our government representatives have totally stopped doing. And in part because there is such a great risk in standing up to the incredible nature of the harms that are occurring. It's just incredible how big of a problem this is. Now, I want to
If I could
switch
elaborate on
gears.
that while
Oh,
you're
go
on that,
on.
because I fully agree. If I could just elaborate on what you
Yes,
just
please.
stated, because it's so core. Those in power will do everything they can to hide and deny these operations until the last possible moment, to the moment of total collapse. Because if the public is awakened to what's been done to them without their knowledge or their consent, not just the manipulation of the Earth's life support systems, but the total contamination of every breath they take, every single weather cataclysm going back decades now becomes a potential liability. Health, everything. because of the toxic nature of these particles: aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, polymer fibers, surfactants, and even graphene. Our last 100 tests with UC Minnesota contained graphene. Those are biological carrier agents used militarily to carry a pathogen from a cloud to the ground. We know that. So, with all this in our breathable air column, the manipulation of the weather, if we could expose this, Nicole, it would cause a shockwave around the world. It would overturn our paradigm. And I would argue those in power will do everything they can to keep this from coming to light. And as far as the fires go, the first full page newspaper ad we paid for at geoengineeringwatch.org, stating exactly what would happen if these operations continued, aka fires of unseen, never before seen magnitude, exactly what we have seen. That was 2008. We published that full page ad in 2008. Everything we said would happen has happened because we were looking at data. So again, the gravity of this issue can't be overstated, and you're completely correct to point out why so many in even positions of government are so afraid to talk about this because of the ramifications to them personally.
Well, and also, what do you do with this information?
You make
Um,
it known. We would argue, when I started this battle 20 plus years ago, all I heard was my own voice coming back at me. No one listened to anything I said, no matter how much testing I did, no matter how much data I dug up. But since that time, as people realize they are going down in the same boat, the ship is sinking, and half the boat doesn't sink.
mhm.
The whole boat sinks, and we're all passengers on it. If we don't deal with this issue, nothing else will matter. No other cause or concern will matter. Very soon, far sooner than most can even dare to imagine, we are in a very nonlinear equation in the very latter stages of total environmental implosion. Again, I'm not
Yeah, we
ignoring
see
all
it
the other
in
factors.
the numbers. Look, Dane, I know the transhumanist agenda. It is These are brilliant minds who can manipulate things in laboratories and artificial environments in ways that are absolutely startling and like will blow your mind.
Mhm.
um, the definition of life itself is being tested,
Yes.
and there are individuals who are building a future um, f- f- for a world that life doesn't exist outside. That's happening. They're building a future for a life in which a man and a woman no longer make babies by intercourse. Like, that's the future that these individuals are planning. And they're planning for it. They're providing the technology for it. So growing food indoors. You said we're not going to be able to have any more soil. And I've seen the indoor hydroponics vertical farms. There's many of them, billions of dollars invested worldwide.
Mhm.
So if you think about a life indoors, I've now even seen homes that are designed for a putrid outdoor environment. There's these new smart home designs. I've been pitched those, and they have full air filtration systems designed to withstand nuclear levels of toxicity outdoors. Cars, even. I mean, look, Elon, I have a sense, understands what's happening. And his cars have all had these, the toxic hazard modes, and you can turn that on, and it recycles all of the internal air. You no longer breathe outdoor air; it just filters and circulates internal air. So there is a group of people, and a lot of money is going into it, that are going to commercially own the indoor existence. Humans will not be well enough to naturally conceive in this future world of dystopian world that they're designing for. And they're banking on it. They're financially banking on it as well. The argument that has to happen right now, and this is a hard argument because you're up against a kind of nihilism, a very anti human, godless nihilism. That is what we were up against. And convincing individuals that this is a crisis, right? And that life, outdoor life, is worth living. Because the sad part is all of these folks that are planning for the dystopian future and building the tools for the dystopian future, they don't surf. They don't make love, right? Many of these men can't have erections, I'm just gonna be honest. Um, the women that are part of it are in physical pain constantly, but they power through because that's what they have to do to be excellent technologists. I know that life. It's an argument that needs to be had at that level. I don't know if that's something that you've thought of before when you feel like your incredible work is falling on deaf ears. It's falling on deaf ears because we've hit a spiritual crisis on this planet.
We have. I agree. And very, very soon, far sooner than most can imagine, there will be no more room for denial. What's unfolding, even in the next weeks and months, is so nonlinear that I would argue it'll be all but impossible for them to hide the climate engineering elephant in the equation. At that point, I would argue they become very desperate and dangerous. That on the current course, if we stay on this trajectory, the damage to the planet's life support systems are so severe, whatever their plans and objectives for some future nightmare will not reach fruition. No one gets out alive on the current course. There's about 50 feedback loops already triggered. And let me give one example. Nicole, you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle sinkings for how many decades, correct? We all know about that. That's methane release from the seafloor because the oceans are warming so radically. And methane fields, methane hydrate and clathrate fields tend to release in entirety. So when a methane field blows, if a surface vessel is on above that column, it aerates the water column. There's no buoyancy. Ship goes to the bottom intact. But then that methane migrates into the air column because it's lighter than air, spreads out, starts to cover the planet like a layer of glass. Methane, we have the climate science community telling us it's 20 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. That's true over a 100-year time horizon. We don't have 100 years. We don't have 10 years. Over a 10-year time horizon, it's 120 times more potent. Climate engineering making that equation far worse, not better, because of their constant dispersions over the polar regions where there are massive methane deposits, especially in the Arctic. And now we have massive Arctic explosions, or excuse me, methane explosions coming out of the Arctic. If your listeners search Siberian methane craters, you have to see it to believe. It looks like nuclear bomb detonations exploding out of the tundra. Seafloor releases are even larger. I'm giving an example of one feedback loop of which there's about 50. So as that methane, again, migrates into the atmosphere, more heating, more methane release, we have a feedback loop. So on the current course for climate engineering being used to try to mask the severity of what's unfolding in order to keep business as usual for as long as possible, in order to use weather as a weapon, is ensuring that no one has any chance for any future on this planet. And I feel the environment the way you do because I've free dove all over the world. New
Mhm.
Zealand, Fiji, Sea of Cortez, Australia. I've been to the Barrier Reef before. It's done. I don't know how many know that. Barrier Reef is done. It's over. It's one of the seven wonders of the world. It's done. Amazon forest is all but done. I think 130 or 40,000 fires in the Amazon this year alone. It's a carbon source now, not a carbon sink. So again, you asked about the severity of where we're at now. Again, global terrestrial insect populations down 80 to 90%. Plankton, 90% down in the Atlantic, other oceans not far behind. Animal populations, wildlife populations have declined conservatively 75% of an already reduced population in the last 40 years alone. So again, fisheries, pelagic fish populations, food fish, down 90% now. And I'll leave it at this. We have a recent peer reviewed study of wild caught fish within the US, within the lower 48, 500 locations. And the study determined that the fish, all of them, are so toxic because, again, our precipitation is toxic. Eating one wild caught fish in the US is equivalent to drinking a month's worth of tainted water. Think about that.
That's devastating. All right, so if we stop the spraying globally, we can do that. I can work on getting that done. But then what? I mean, the methane explosions, in the ocean, I think that if we try to stop that, it's just it's going to lead to quicker devastation. I mean, that's the rationale for why individuals think that geoengineering is a must, is because we're on this crash course. It was human caused, human impacted. W w Geoengineering to many people is the only way out. What is the Dane Wigington solution?
All forms of climate intervention must be immediately ceased. And the climate science community has tried to paint exactly the picture you just described. You're completely correct. We have a scenario term for this is called double catastrophe scenario. And they want us to believe that once you start climate engineering, you can never stop. That's like telling an addict, once you start drugs, you can only keep upping your dose. You can never stop. However horrific the attempt for the planet to reach equilibrium again would be after the cessation of these programs, it must be allowed to happen. The planet must be allowed to respond on its own to the damage already done before the hydrological cycle is completely broken, or we have no chance. So again, the only way, the first and most important leap we can take, the only way forward is to reach a critical mass of awareness so those participating, especially our military brothers and sisters, understand what they're participating in, literally their own demise. Same with private defense contractors, their families, so that they understand they're pounding the nails into their own collective coffins. If by our collective efforts, and voices like yours are so profoundly important in this battle, and and again, I'm so grateful to you. I can't express after this 20 years of arduous journey to know you're standing in this with us. But if by our collective efforts we can force this issue to the full light of day, I would argue the fur will fly at that point. Shockwave around the world. Our problems aren't over by any stretch, but if in doing so, we can stop these programs from the inside out so that our military brothers and sisters, especially because that's the biggest part of this equation. The US military has 3 times more aerial tankers than all other militaries in the world combined. If we can stop these applications, allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage already done, we can then assess where we're at. But that effort will definitely take all of us, and time is not on our side.
Yeah. I do have a national regenerative agriculture plan,
We'll need it.
um, and I thought that it was as simple as combating a natural yet stable climate change, uh, schedule, but it's not, because now it's compounded by geoengineering, which has accelerated the pace of climate destruction. Um, I have to believe that if we stop the acceleration of climate change via geoengineering, that the Earth will rebound. That this beautiful planet of ours, which is full of life still, can heal. And it's really interesting talking about the planet in this way because it reminds me of what my journey is like with my 6-year-old daughter trying to heal her.
Mhm.
And uh, there's a term in Greek called um, it's like pathogenesis, but salugenesis, I believe. And it's the idea that if you take away the stressors on a human, that the body is able to come into the state of healing. There's this thing called cell danger response coined by a mitochondrial expert, Robert Navio, who's in San Diego. And he's written a beautiful paper about how this works in the human body, that once you take the human body out of cell danger response, that all of these chronic diseases, and he's shown it and mapped it, he's done full reviews of the scientific literature as well. And he's like, if you take it out of cell danger response, all of these different pathways in the body start to heal. But it's a lot of work to keep the body out of cell danger response, that you have to do things. You can't just leave it alone. You
No.
actually have to steward the body.
And this biggest single, the most destructive form of human activity to this point, short of nuclear cataclysm, is climate engineering. Single most destructive human activity of all, and is preventing the planet from responding to the damage already done. And in regard to, if I could weave that together briefly, nuclear cataclysm, is that related? Could that be related to climate engineering if this trajectory continues? Yes, because our atmosphere is so damaged at this point. If we have a large coronal mass ejection, a CME, solar flare, that will shut down grids around the globe. Nuclear power plants won't be able to cool themselves, and we'll have a lot of Fukushimas, 100, 200, game over. So even with nuclear cataclysm, climate engineering is diminishing our odds of near-term survival. This must be stopped or nothing else will matter. And one last point in regard to what we see in our skies, just to clarify this, because we hadn't touched on this yet. This is not condensation. And I want to encourage people to look at the film footage we have at geoengineeringwatch.org of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of debate. This is not condensation. And we took a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, again, as I mentioned, flying lab to altitude, sampled these materials. This isn't condensation. That narrative is absolutely a profound deception. So we're encouraging people to simply look at the data, help us to stop this issue. If by our collective efforts we can, and we can allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done. I believe, as you do, Nicole, that the planet is so miraculous that if we simply give it a chance, who knows what's possible. But that chance starts
And
with
we can
stopping.
help it. We can steward the land and in its healing process.
We have to try.
I've seen it happen in small plots. I mean, certainly we can do it, in much larger projects as well.
We have to try, Nicole. I'm with you. And again, it starts with exposing and stopping these programs a bit. But if we could simply expose it, I would argue so many wheels in the battle will turn on their own as people that are involved in these programs being told they're doing something good, something benevolent, which couldn't be further from the truth, that they stand down. That's our only chance to stop these programs from the inside out. But your voice, very, very important in this battle. I'm so grateful to you.
I'm grateful to you. I wouldn't have figured out half of this stuff if it hadn't been for the work you've done compiling it over the last 20 years. And I will say, Dane, even though you feel like your cries have landed on deaf ears, in places of government power, the people know what's going on. I would say many people are very much aware of the spraying. They call it chemtrails, and then they're told to shut up because you're a conspiracy theorist, and so they kind of keep it to themselves. But the whispers, there's people, they're everywhere. People are talking about this. They just don't know how. And the more that we can empower individuals with the language and the science
Yes.
and knowing how to ask for what's needed and
Yes.
why, that's where the real power lies. The power is in the people. If we and it's not just about making sure that the people have voice, but it's that they have a full understanding of how to use their voices.
Fully
And
agree.
so I encourage everyone to visit your website. It's geoengineeringwatch.org.
Yes.
Watch the dimming and know that you're not crazy. You trust your intuition, trust your body. If you feel sick after you see those checkered marks in the sky, know why. You're not crazy.
Team effort. And we'll continue to do our best to be the go-to
Yeah.
source on this issue. We have an activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org that describes exactly how anyone can help to move this fight forward for free from your own home computer, sharing links to the dimming. And we are communicating with congressional reps from many states now, Nicole, and they are waking up. And there's legislation in about 24 states now being pushed forward. And we're getting close to critical mass. And that doesn't mean our problems are over, but that is the first and most profound leap we can make in the right direction. So thank you for your help in this battle. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you for all that you do. And thank you for those in office and who have the power now to put an end to this, knowing very well that we can protect the future of humanity, life on this planet, and give it a shot to heal. It can heal, and we have all the tools.